What up? And Merry Christmas. Great holiday, my favorite holiday. So to you and yours, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. It's a great time. Santa hopefully has delivered the presents that everybody wanted. Good pod ahead. We've got a little bit of story time as promised in one of the feeds. But first, a little SimWorld U thoughts, updates. We are in the midst of the Maui Invitational out in Hawaii. They moved it to the Christmas holiday this year. But that's not what we're necessarily only talking about. We're talking about one of the teams that's out there. First up, Houston. Houston has had some major issues. They got their first win of the season, if you want to call it that, against Chaminade. They play against Villanova tonight. They're number 16 in the country, sitting at 4-2. Right now, they're 1-4. Their losses have come to Kentucky, Arizona State, Maryland, and Gonzaga. This is a team that entered with high aspirations. I think it's very much seriously time to talk about or be concerned about their prospects. I think you can make the case. Kentucky, Maryland's 7-1, Kentucky's number 2, Gonzaga's 4-0 and in the top 25. You can understand those losses, and if they end up losing to Villanova, you can understand it, right? That's 4 teams that are ranked in the top 25. Arizona State, that shouldn't have been a loss, and they lost to them regardless. This is a team that entered with high aspirations, high expectations. They brought in a really good recruiting class, and they've had good runs. Here's the good news. They're going to go into an American conference where they're never going to have to see any of these Power 5 teams again. Really, the only team that stands in their way in the American is Memphis. But as we look at this team and whatever they develop into down the line, this was supposed to be the start of something really, really great for them. It hasn't been. They can go on to have a really great conference record. They could win the American for all we know at this point. They're staying in the American before moving to the Big 12. That was kind of changed up in SimWorld U for the season just off of kind of logistics of where these programs are located. Where they end up, I think, is going to be very much different. We need to remember, I guess is my point, we need to remember this start for them, because if they go and they roll through the American, the Cincinnatis, the USFs of the world, the SMUs, let's not overreact to it, because what we've seen so far are close losses to teams that we expected them to beat. This is actually, before I keep going, we're going to kind of talk about a lot of teams that we might not hear about a ton anymore. None of these teams, we're talking about 4 of them, none of these teams are ranked in the top 25. So I just want to caveat that. This is teams that are kind of flying under the radar right now that could be threatening, but haven't been outright. So, Penn State, let's go there next. Stephen Johnson Odom, 14-4, 14 boards. Marcus Lofton has been phenomenal for this team, 14.7 points, 5 boards, 5 assists per game. He's stepped in. Both of those two freshmen have stepped in next to Miles Dredd and Andrew Funk. Dredd is averaging 21, 5, and 6. Funk averaging 18.1 points per game. This is a really good Penn State team. They're 5-3 in a really loaded top Big Ten. 6 teams are ranked in the top 25. Plus, you've got 7-1 Maryland and Cooper King Cross. They're staying above water, which at this point of the season is important. Their 3 losses have come by a combined 12 points, so they're not getting blown out. But as you look at their wins, you don't really look at that and say, these are dominant wins. These are teams, mid-majors, teams that you'd expect them to kind of rack up the wins early on in the season. They've lost to Memphis. They've lost to Alabama, which makes me think this team isn't going to make a push in the Big Ten. All that being said, the pieces of this Nittany Lions puzzle is starting to come together, particularly if Johnson Odom and Marcus Lofton, the latter of which I would expect to stay, the former I don't know, but if they come back for another season, I think Penn State could be a real threat in the Big Ten. As it sits right now, I think the conference is just way too deep for them to make serious noise. It might be the best conference in college basketball through the first month of the regular season. Speaking of Memphis, they haven't grabbed the bull by the horns. We talk about Houston struggling. We haven't started conference play yet, so all of that has to kind of be the caveat that we understand, but they haven't really erupted into a takeover. Lacedarius Outlaw has been phenomenal. 26 points, 4 boards, 5.5 assists. He's been exactly what we'd expect. Now, the concern when he was coming into Memphis was, are the pieces that he gets going to be as dominant as he is, right? That was the concern at Best Coast Ballers when he played for 2 seasons in SimWorld Prep. He was great. His teammates were not. And as a result of that, he carried an exorbitant offensive load, and his team was good record-wise, but they never were elite. They weren't ever a real threat, I think, at any point. That's kind of where Memphis is sitting right now. He's been really good. He's got good support from Elijah McCaden and Darian Banks. Both of those guys are averaging 14 or 15 points in the inverse. It's a good basketball team. Their two losses, though, are to Nevada and Maryland. And aside from that Penn State win, which, depending on how you want to view Penn State, as we just talked about, it's not a great one if Penn State walks into the Big Ten, runs into all those ranked teams, and starts falling apart. They don't have a great early season resume. And as we looked at the American and we said it's Houston, it's Memphis, we expect that to be the clash. I don't know that that's a given, but if we end up there, it's not going to feel as dominant as I think many people had hoped entering the season. Let's go upstart for our last one, Arizona. They're out of the Maui Invitational. They got wins over number 3 Baylor and number 21 Indiana, who beat number 16 Villanova. They walk into the championship game there trying to prove things. This has been a really good season for them. I don't think anyone is going to, at this point in the season, going to look at that team and say, it's fraudulent. When you go out and you can beat top 25 teams on consecutive outings, that's legitimate. And they've got good pieces in there. Khalil Erickson has not been one of them, which I think would probably be the biggest surprise. He's been under 5 points per game. He's been a lot of the defensive work that we've expected from him. They're going to get a matchup with number 18 Gonzaga in the in the Maui Invitational Championship game. The statements are coming. The statements are coming from this team. Juan Valentine has been their best scorer, 25.7 points per game, but I think the biggest surprise has been Theophilus Hilton, 21.3 points. Those two guys are not what I think many people expected out of the Wildcats, at least not personally. This is a team that's now starting to put together some pieces. That being said, this is all teams that we might not expect to see at the end of the road. The Pac-12 isn't great as it sits right now. And Arizona is probably going to walk out of Maui, regardless of the win or the game against Gonzaga. They're probably going to walk out of there as Pac-12 favorites because people are going to say, look at this track record. You beat Baylor, who was a top 5 team. You beat Indiana, who beat a top 25 team. So that's 2 top 25 wins, back-to-back nights, and you're going to try to go 3 for 3 with a matchup against Gonzaga, who's rolling with Caden Shipp. My money's still on UCLA, who's played twice. They're 1-1. This is a good Arizona team, but if your top two contributors, Juan Valentine and Theophilus Hilton, are the benchmarks of this group, I'm not convinced that that's Pac-12 championship worthy. Is it? I mean, look, this is resume building. Is it March Madness at-large bid capable? If they can put together a good run in the Pac-12, absolutely. But I would be really impressed if this is a team that we end up seeing in the Sweet 16 or even at any point in the second weekend. All right, quick story time. We promised it at the top. Florida School of the Deaf and the Blind. This is a little fun fact plus the storyline, so buckle up, baby. This might not be your Christmas fairy tale story type of deal, but here we are. So when I was a little younger, not that young, can't be that old, but I was probably 24, 25, maybe 23 even. But anyway, I had a friend. His parents could still have a friend, but his parents live in just outside of St. Augustine. And that's, of course, where the Florida School for the Deaf and the Blind is. And so as I'm driving to get to their house, you have to kind of go past the school. And I was coming in on a Friday, and I see these lights are on a football field. I'm like, there's no way that this is a football team. Of course, there are colleges that are dedicated to deaf and mute players, but get to his place. We got to check this out. So we go over, and I have to say this was one of the strangest experiences at a live sporting event that I've had. And these were perfectly fine. Now, granted, they were playing a team. It was another impaired team. I'm a guess another deaf mute team. They were from, I think, New Jersey, and the other team was beating them up. But it was fascinating that there's no cheering at these games. It's a lot of snapping, but it's a very muted, no pun intended, just a very muted response to everything going on. A 70-yard touchdown run is just greeted by hands in the air. That's it, because there's no real necessity to be cheering. You're looking at play calls. Normally, it's a very vocal sideline when you go to any football game, particularly in high school, where you're calling the game in, whether that's through signs or through verbiage. None of that. All of it was obviously hand signals, but there was no, hey, we got to get to this location. It was the quietest sporting event that I've ever been to. And it was impressive. It was impressive that you had the capability to relay all this. And this would have been, 7 to 10 years ago. So you don't have the type of technology that we have now, where you see the AT&T ads where the helmet has a little screen built into it over the eye so the players can see what the play call is. That wasn't the case at that point in time. You're looking at everything being hand signals, which from a football perspective, obviously you're doing that anyway, but just the challenge of coaching without verbal communication was extremely impressive. And the fun fact about the school, Ray Charles went to the Florida School for the Deaf and the Blind. He was actually expelled from the school for stealing a car, and his deaf friend was the one navigating him, as he was obviously blind and not driving. So you want to talk about just some intuition and some impressive teamwork right there. Little blind, deaf action leading the way in a stolen vehicle. I don't know how far they got. I can't imagine it was very. But I appreciate the initiative regardless. All right, look, have a great holiday. We will be back on a couple broadcasts this week. Obviously back here on Monday, recapping all the things that go on. Let's see, Monday, if we can get our dates right, that's going to be the 1st. So I hope everybody has a safe and happy New Year, and we will talk to you to be a loser in the next year. All right, have a good one.